It's time for Don't Mess This Up, presented by Snickers, where we help you not mess it up when it comes to setting your fantasy lineup in week 2. 5 big questions for fantasy managers as we head into the second week of the fantasy football season. The first one, down in Tampa, the Bucks, mainly Bruce Arians, made the announcement on Tuesday that Ronald Jones would be the team's starting running back against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, last week, Rojo fumbled early in that game, and we didn't see him for the rest of the evening. According to reports, it was mostly that he was sort of mentally beating himself up on the sidelines and just wasn't really ready to get back into the game. This seems to be a pattern, though, with the Bucks. One guy makes a mistake, and then he's sort of banished to the sidelines for the rest of the day. So even with Bruce Arians saying Ronald Jones is the starter, Florio, how much do we trust the Bucks to actually stick with that?
0%. Everything that Bruce Arians has done really since coming into Tampa has shown that he does not have a whole lot of faith in Ronald Jones. Like, Ronald Jones is a good runner of the football, but the first thing Bruce Arians did was draft Keyshawn Vaughn, right? And then he brings in Leonard Fournette. And then this year they bring in Gio Bernard. And in week 1, we saw what could go wrong if you trust a Bucks running back. I mean, a fumble and then he's gone. He gives you negative fantasy points on the week. Ronald Jones is always one fumble away from just being benched for the entire game. We've seen that happen more than once. They seem to trust Leonard Fournette a little bit more in passing situations, and Gio Bernard is obviously there for a reason as well. So if Ronald Jones isn't catching a lot of passes, that already limits his upside. And then you got to factor in that he could hit the bench at any point. So I have a hard time trusting really any of the Bucks running backs.
I feel like this lack of trust isn't about Ronald Jones. It's more about how the coaches are going to use him or whether or not we're going to just see him sitting on the sideline. And so I just have this feeling that a lot of folks may end up sitting Rojo, and it could be a game where, he holds on to the football, he has a really good day, and people miss out on that just because you have that fear of what could happen. And I am just sort of curious, and I don't know that there's an answer to this, about what it is, why it is that Jones takes it so hard when he makes a mistake. I don't know if it's that he's feeling pressure from the coaches, if it's an internal pressure or whatever it is. I think he's a good player. I want to see him sort of have some success. But if this is a thing that he can't get past mentally, then it's going to be tough. And at least for our selfish fantasy purposes, it does make it hard, as you said, to really trust any Buccaneers running back. Because even last week, we didn't see a lot of Gio Bernard either. He didn't get a whole lot of attention. It was mostly the Leonard Fournette show. Although who knows, maybe in a weird way, maybe this works out and maybe this turns it into a one-man backfield.
You already know what's going to happen, Marcus. Like, people are going to bench Ronald Jones. He's going to go off. Then next week they'll start him again and he'll hit the bench for something. Like, it's just the most unpredictable backfield in football.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Let's stay in the state of Florida, move up to Jacksonville. James Robinson did not have a good day on Sunday. I thought it was going to be better. It just seemed like the Jags didn't really get him involved in the offense. We saw a lot of Carlos Hyde. So how confident are you in James Robinson heading to week 2?
A lot less confidence than I was heading into week 1. I'll tell you that. I'll say I'm not as worried as some are. He still did play the majority of the snaps. And while Carlos Hyde did have more carries, Robinson had 6 targets, which is valuable because we know, Marcus, that in PPR leagues, which NFL.com leagues are, a target is very valuable for a running back. But I will say that, last week in a good matchup against the Texans, I had him ranked in the top 10 running backs. We know that did not work out. This week, he is a low-end RB2 for me. So I do have some volume concerns there. Urban Meyer seems to want to get Carlos Hyde involved. He just seems to want to get a running back that is not named James Robinson involved. It's kind of been his goal since he's come to Jacksonville. I don't fully get it, but from what we've seen so far in this offense, I don't think you could value him too much higher than a RB2, maybe low to mid-end RB2.
It's almost like Urban Meyer just wants to put his own stamp on this team and have his own guys, even though the guy that he has there was very productive last year. I don't really understand it, but watching that game, I don't think Robinson got his first official carry until a couple minutes into the second quarter. I think he had one in the first quarter that was called back because of a holding penalty, and just the usage was really surprising and strange. And I hope it gets better, but I'm really concerned, especially because the Jaguars just looked awful. And so that means a lot of negative game scripts coming. So it might be more Carlos Hyde than we anticipated starting the year. Next question. What do we do with Brandon Aiyuk? I mean, Trey Sermon was the healthy scratch. At least that way we knew to get him out of our lineups. We didn't know that Brandon Aiyuk was not really going to see the field and it was going to be Trent Sherfield instead. I have no idea what to do now because I was pretty heavily invested in Brandon Aiyuk, and now I have no idea where to pivot with him on my rosters.
I don't have a whole lot of Aiyuk, but I thought he was going to be a really good player this year. I just thought the volume week to week would be a little inconsistent. I did not expect him to barely play in week 1. Like, we only have footage of him returning a punt because he did not have a target in week 1. But what I'm thinking right now, at least the play should be with Aiyuk is you bench him if you have him. And if you don't have him, I think you go out and try to trade him for pretty cheap right now because I'm sure whoever does have him is panicking. I mean, the guy was playing behind Trent Sherfield in week 1, but that is not why we drafted this guy in the 5th or 6th round. But Marcus, I know you follow the 49ers very closely. Wasn't there reports last year too that like he was struggling to be like a professional or something along those lines, and that like they were trying to teach him a lesson? Maybe this is something like that. I just find it hard to believe that the Niners are going to be able to get through this season without the playmaking abilities of Brandon Aiyuk.
Maybe this is trying to teach him a lesson a little bit. It still was definitely a surprise just seeing what he did on the field. You would think that they would try to incorporate him a little bit more. So we'll see whether or not this changes. I know it's a thing Kyle Shanahan said he wants to talk to the player about sooner rather than later. So maybe this is a little bit of a wake-up call. This is going to be a key week, though. I think we're going to learn a whole lot. Aiyuk got on the field mostly in the second half when the Niners had a big lead, but still didn't see any targets. So this was definitely a surprise, and this week's going to be sort of a litmus test. But I'm with you. I don't know that I can start him right now until we get some more clarity on exactly what his role is going to be in the 49ers offense. We were kind of keeping an eye out for Tyson Williams last week. We wanted to see what he could do. I know a lot of folks were in a situation where they had to start him, and if you did, congrats, because he ended up having a pretty nice game. So this week, as the Ravens take on the Chiefs, how high do you have Williams ranked?
This is one of the hardest things for me to figure out this week, Marcus. I have Williams as RB29 and Latavius Murray as RB30, and I'm really sure, like in some spots, Marcus, I got to decide Williams or Claypool or Williams or like another receiver. And I'm really struggling with it because Williams looks good. Like, he had 9 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown. He also added in 3 catches for 29 yards on 4 targets. 4 targets is, I believe it is the most, ties for the most a running back has ever had in a game with Lamar Jackson. There might have been one game where they had 5, but it's towards one of the highest totals a running back has had. But down the stretch, Baltimore went to Latavius Murray. Like, he had more carries in this game. They all really were coming in the second half. We even started to see Latavius Murray on passing plays, on play action plays. And Tyson Williams, what stood out to me was on that Lamar Jackson fumble down the stretch that gave the Raiders a chance to come back in this game. Tyson Williams just completely blew a pass protection opportunity there. So I am not really sure what to make of this backfield. I think both right now are just kind of flex options.
The Latavius Murray down the stretch definitely surprised me because Williams looked like he was running pretty effectively. He definitely has more juice than Murray does right now, but it could be that pass protection thing. And that's something that we sort of talk about, but not a lot, but it is sort of important. And it's definitely a hallmark for young players. We see a lot of young guys come in and they struggle with that part of the game. In Baltimore, you have to be able to protect Lamar Jackson. He is the franchise. He is the key element in that offense. And so if you don't have a running back that's protecting the quarterback, it is going to make it tough, especially late in games when it's close or if the Ravens are trailing. So that may be something to pay attention to. But if Williams continues to perform the way he did for the first 3 quarters of that game, he really is a viable RB2 prospect. But it could really be that Latavius Murray isn't going away. Also be interesting to see what happens, if anything, with Le'Veon Bell and Devontae Freeman. I'd like for this to stay as a 2 running back backfield. I would like for those other guys to not be involved. But we'll sort of keep an eye on it as we get further down the road here. Last big question for the week. The Bengals and the Bears play, which first off is an Andy Dalton revenge game. So let's start there. But the bigger question is there are a couple of running backs who had good week ones that are facing off against each other. So which one would you rather have this week? Certainly. Joe Mixon or David Montgomery?
I think David Montgomery has the bigger game, and much of it is because of matchup. Like, the Bears' D-line is just a lot more scary than the Bengals are. The Bengals, we know you could run on this team. David Montgomery looked really good in week 1. 16 carries, 108 yards, and a touchdown. My only concern with Montgomery is he had just one target where Damian Williams had 5. That's that new Tariq Cohen role there for Damian Williams. So Joe Mixon, on the other hand, he had a bunch of carries. He was utilized in the passing game. I feel good about both of these guys, but this week, just because of the matchup, I will lean David Montgomery.
Down on that and say Monty as well. The dude just looks good, and I think it's 7 straight weeks dating back to last year that he's finished as a top 10 fantasy running back. I mean, last year, I know down the stretch, everybody said, well, it's because he had a favorable schedule, but yeah, he took advantage of it. Then he comes out against the Rams in week 1 and looked good again. I was sort of surprised and a little bit concerned about how much Damian Williams was involved in the offense, but if Montgomery continues to run as effectively as he has, I think it's not going to be so much of an issue. And you're right, the matchup is certainly more in Montgomery's favor, having to go against the Bengals defense versus Mixon having to go against that Bears front starting off week 2. But both guys off to a good start, and that should be encouraging for fantasy managers who have either one of those guys on their roster.